Hi everyone, welcome to a new video on the CBI channel. In this Django for Beginners tutorial series, we're developing a block-style web application with Python Django. And it will allow users to sign up, to sign in, and to create, edit, and also delete different blog posts. Now, this is not the first video in this series. In fact, we've already done 11 before, and in those we have come to this result, where we have a nice looking homepage with the blog post displayed and the option to create blog posts, but also to already edit or delete them. Now you will notice in our posts on the homepage, but also on the delete page, that we still have the gray boxes where the images should be. And that is because our application currently can't handle images. And that is exactly what we're going to be enabling in the video today, because we want users to upload blog posts with a nice looking image and then display it on the pages so that the user can see it. Now, to do that, we're going to be following 6 steps. We're going to start by modifying some of our project settings and also the URL page and install the Pillow package to help us with handling images. And that will make sure that our Django app can handle everything it needs to do. Then we need to make sure that we can store images inside of our application. And we first do that by adding a field for the images in our model and then add a form so the users can upload images. Of course, it also needs to do something when we submit that data. So we need to change the view for when we create a record so that it can process the images, and the same but then for editing the records. And as a last step, when we have stored the images in our application, we're going to add that to the posts on the homepage and on the delete page. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is changing the settings of our Django project. So we're going to go to the blog folder and then to the settings.py file. And in here, below the allowed hosts, we need to add 2 settings. And those settings are going to tell us where our application can later on find the images. So the first thing that we will define here is something called the media underscore root. And that is going to tell us in which folder it can find the images. And in this case, we define that as the base dir, the base directory, and then slash, and then media. So that means that our application needs to look at the highest level, so in Django project, and then in a folder called media. Now, next to the media root, we also need to have the media underscore URL, and that is going to be equal to slash media. And that is the actual web address where it is going to find those images. Now, of course, it's nice that we say that it needs to look at the highest level of our application and then in media, but we don't actually have a folder there. So I will also create that right now. So what I've done is I've added a folder and I've called that media. Now, the next change that we need to make is in our urls.py file, because we also need to tell our urls.py file inside of the blog section where it can find the images. So what we do right here on the top is we start with some imports. First, we do from django.conf and we import the settings. That will import all of the settings that we had in our settings.py file. And next to that, we do from django.conf.urls.static and we import static. Now we need to tell our URLs where it can find the link to the images. And we do that by saying if settings.debug, and this is going to tell our application that if the debug is equal to true, so if we are on our local computer, where it needs to look for the images, because when you deploy this, your images are most likely going to be in another place. And then we can say it needs to look at URL patterns, but also it needs to look at static. And then we need to provide the location of where our files are actually at. And let's first add an M right here. So what we wanted to take a look at is the settings.media underscore URL, which is the setting that we've just added. And the place where it needs to look is the document underscore root. And that is going to be equal to the settings.media root. So we're basically telling that it needs to take a look at all of the URLs, but also it needs to take a look at all of the media that we have in our media folder. And that will enable us to make sure that we know where the images are and that we can correctly link them from the media folder to the different templates. Now, to make sure that we can correctly handle images in our application, we will need a package called Pillow, because that will make our life a lot easier and is going to help us with handling all of those images in our Django application. So we're going to be copying over this statement right here. So the pip install pillow, and I'll leave this link in the description. And inside of our code, we're going to be opening a new terminal. And we will activate our virtual environment by doing venv/scripts/activate, because we always want to install the new packages in our virtual environment. And then we do python-m and then pip install pillow. And just like that, we are done. And now all of the configuration and the settings are all done, and we can focus on adding those images into our application. Now the next step is to add a new column inside of our blog post table. Because currently in our models.py file, we can submit a title and a content, but we don't really have a field that is going to store the images. So to do that, we're going to be adding a new field, and we're going to be calling that image. And this is going to be a models.image field. And we need to add a few parameters to make that work. So the first thing that it needs to know is the upload to. And the upload to is basically the folder where we want to upload the images to. Now, due to the settings that we've added, it's going to go to the media folder straight away, which is right here. But we can also specify that we want it then to be stored in a folder called images. So then it's going to be creating a new folder called images inside of media so that we can even further split the images up. Now, of course, we also want to tell this column that blank can be true and null can be true. And that means that this is not a required field in our database. Now, the reason that I do that is that we already have data in our database right now that doesn't have an image. And if we make this field required, it will throw an error because it doesn't have a default value or an image yet for that row. So that's why we do it like this. Now, of course, we need to apply these changes, and we can do that with two commands in our terminal. We do python manage.py and then make migrations. And now we can see that it's added a field called image to the blog post. And then we do python manage.py migrate. And that has made all of the migrations active. And if we now check our database through the tool of DB browser, we can refresh this view. And you can now see that we have a field called image being added to this table. So that has been working just fine. So let's now start our server by doing python manage.py run server. And when we now check the create blog post page, you notice that we already have forms for title and for content, but not yet for the image. So we also need to add that to the form section. So we're going to go to the forms.py file inside of the posts folder. And in there, we're going to be adding a new entry. So below content, we're going to add a field called image. And that is going to be set equal to a forms.image field. Now, of course, here we also need some parameters similar to the other forms. So first of all, we give it a label and we say upload an image. Now, next to that, we are also going to say that required is false because it's not mandatory to have an image, but it's nice if people do it. And we are also going to make sure that we have a widget. And that widget is going to be equal to forms.clearable file input. And that should give us a form that is going to be displaying a widget where it allows us to enter a file. So let's now save this. Now, one last thing that we need to do is we also need to enter this in the fields section. So we say that we also want to have the field of image. And let's save that. And because that blog post form is mentioned in its entirety in the create page and also completely inside of the create.html page, it should be rendered on the page right now. So if we refresh this, you notice that we now have the option of adding an image. So we can choose a file and then select whatever we would like. Now this is all very nice, but our current logic in our view cannot handle these images yet. So we can pick a file and submit it, but we need to add something there to make it work. So we're going to go to the views.py file inside of our application. And let's first start with the create. So in the create section, there are a few things we need to adjust. The first thing you want to adjust is inside of the requested methods it's post. We do not only want to include request.post, but we're also going to add request.files. And that is going to help us with the submission of the files. Now, of course, if the form is valid, we are here mentioning all of the inputs. So we mention title and then content. But now we also have the image. So I'm going to copy over this content and we say that the image is going to be equal to form.clean data and then image. And of course, these names are all exactly the same as in our models.py file and in the forms.py file. Next, we clarify that blog is equal to title is title and content is content. But then we can also say that the image must be saved in the image. And that's going to take this and store it in here. And then it is going to save this blog post and return us to the blog post page. Now there's one final change that we need to make, and that is inside of our create.html file. Inside of the form tag that we have right here, we're not only going to add the method post, but we need to add something called enc type, and that is going to be equal to multi-part slash form data. That's actually a slash, and we need to add that because we're going to be handling images. So let's now try this out for real. So we're here in our application and we're going to be clicking on create blog post, and I'm going to have this article of Aberrachi Easy. So I'm going to copy over this title as a dummy and also the text that we have right here. And I've right-clicked this image and saved it on my computer as an image. So now inside of this blog post, we're going to choose a file and I'm going to select the image that I have that I've just stored. And now we can submit this like a post. And now when we reload our database, you notice that we have the title and the content, but also a link to where the image has actually been stored. And if we go to our code and we go to the media folder, you notice that a new folder called images has been made. And we now have this image of Easy stored inside of our project. So this seems to be working just fine. Now, of course, we also want to achieve this when we are going to be editing our views. So let's do that right now. Now for the edit, the only thing that we need to change is we need to go to the part where we submit the data. And also there in the form, we need to specify that we want to have request.files. And that is the only change that we need to make right here. And of course, we also need to go to our template. And let's go first to the created HTML template. And we're going to copy over this enc type from our form. And we're also going to put that in the edit part so that it handles the form submission in the same way. So we're now in the browser. And if I now click on the edit for the SE post, we notice that we have the SE picture right here. But we can also make sure that we have another picture. So if I want to change it, I choose a file again. And this time I'm going to just get my logo in there. And if I now submit this post and we edit it again, you notice that my logo is now the main link. And also in our database, if we refresh it, the image has now changed to what I just put in there. So the edit functionality works fine. Now on the homepage, we still see this gray box. So let's now change that so we actually see the image. Now to do that, we can actually go back to the code and we can go directly to our homepage. Because if we check our view, we already put all of the information that we have from the blog post on our homepage. So we can just take a look at the blog.image field to get our image. So off to the templates and then to the home.html file. And in the place for the article image, we are going to be adding an image tag. Now inside of that image tag, we need to provide a source. And that source is going to be equal to the link of our image inside of our project. So we do 2 times the squarely brackets And then we say that in the source, we want to display the blog.image.url. Now, of course, we notice that it can also happen that we don't have an image. So we only want to display this image if the image is actually there. Because if there's no image, then there's nothing to display. So inside of this class image, we are going to check if the image actually exists. So we'll do some squarely brackets and then 2 times the percentage sign. And that allows us to do an if statement. And we say if block.image, which is going to evaluate if that is the case, then we want to render the image. And otherwise, we don't want to do anything. And we can do 2 times the percentage sign, and we can do and if. So we're now on the home page, and you can see that we indeed have an image right here on the page. However, the image is much bigger than the block that we initially have made. So we also need to change some of the CSS settings over there. So we're going to go to the main.css file inside of our project. And in there, we're going to go to our article image and the article image delete, because that way we can do two of the things at the same time. So below it, we're going to do dot article image and then img. And we also want to target article image delete img. And if we hover over it, you notice that it will target the image tag inside of this class. So that does exactly what we want it to do. Now in here, we can say that we want the object fit to be cover. So we do object fit and we set that to cover. And we also need to set the height and the width. And we're just going to get that from the article image delete, because otherwise our object fit will not really know what it will need to cover. And now you notice that the image will try to fit in this box. So it's going to try to fit in this box as best as it actually can. And that will make sure that our images are always going to be nice like this. So if we now put it back to what it was before, so we go to the desktop and I'm taking my SE image again and I post it, you notice that we now get the correct image that we have. And it actually looks quite nice because it tries to get into the shape that we have defined. Now we need to do the same thing for the delete, because if we want to delete this, the image is still not visible. So we can go to our home.html page and just copy over this item for the blog.image. And we're going to bring that to the delete part and then go to the place where the image would go. And that is actually right here inside of the div class for image delete. And we can do the exact same statement in here that we want to see the image if the image is there. And if we refresh this page, we now also see the image there. So this seems to be working just fine. And that is actually all for this video. In this video, I showed you how we can add images to our blog posts and how we can display them on our different pages. In the next video, we're going to continue and I'm going to show you how we can add select fields inside of this form so that we can add different categories of our blog posts. I want to thank you very much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.